All right, so today we're going to talk about St. James Infirmary. This is a jazz standard that has been in circulation. I don't know if but it's been in circulation for over 100 years now, and it's got a very long and mysterious history that has been deliberately altered and reframed over the years in ways to erase its true origins, which is really interesting. But first, to talk about those origins, we have to talk about The Unfortunate Lad. So The Unfortunate Lad was a traditional Irish folk ballad that later became known as the Unfortunate Rake, which is actually a product of misinformation in and of itself. But the Unfortunate Lad, or the Unfortunate Rake, was a tune that was, for a while, commonly said and commonly believed to be the predecessor of St. James Infirmary. Now, this was something that had become so commonly accepted in academia, in the vernacular common knowledge. Even Bob Dylan quoted it on air. But this is actually false. But the main misinformant, well, first, I should say the origins of the myth really came from all of these scholars around the turn of the century that started producing literature, claiming that there was a series of songs that stemmed from The Unfortunate Lad. And they called this group the Rake Cycle. And the actual research that these folks were doing was so convoluted and sometimes non-existent. They would often be making arguments with little to no evidence, or would even make a statement and then not further the argument. And then they would cite each other and cite each other's misinformation. Sometimes there were instances where one source would cite another for something that wasn't actually in the thing that they cited in the first place. So we have these layers of misinformation that became such a deep stack upon each other that they were suddenly looked at as authentic and as real academic sources that people still cite to this day. One of the people that cited those sources was A.L. Lloyd, who was the main misinformant behind the idea that St. James Infirmary comes from The Unfortunate Lad. He published, for one thing, he was a folklorist, a folk singer, and a journalist, and he published these articles in 1947 it was the first time that we saw somebody claim specifically that St. James Infirmary was a part of this rake cycle. He actually openly admitted, both in his literature and his interviews, that he often altered the lyrics or the phrases of folk songs so that he could, or made composites even if there were multiple versions, and would say that he would often alter them to his own liking, or if he thought that it was inadequate, he would make it better in his own way. At least that's what he was telling everybody else. But the problem was this then was looked back at as the authentic traditional materials. And that includes his statement about The Unfortunate Lad, or The Unfortunate Rake, and St. James Infirmary, where he actually changed the lyrics of The Unfortunate Lad to make them more similar to St. James Infirmary to support his claims. And any other differences between the two, he basically chalked up to being confusion from the Negro versions, was the way that he stated it. And other sources afterwards not only referenced his articles on the subject, but also peddled basically the same concept that, oh, well, these other differences were just the result of changes and confusion from what they called the Negro blues versions, or the Negro versions, which is a really interesting point because it shows that these academics, these scholars, knew that St. James Infirmary was a black blues song. They just wanted to find ways to claim that it was influenced by their motherland. Of course, that's never happened before. But anyways, this became a really a densely packed web of misinformation that to this day has been accepted in the academic canon as the authentic truth about a subject when, as we know, it's clearly not the case. Now let's get into what really was one of the predecessors of St. James Infirmary, which is a tune called Gambler's Blues. It was first recorded by Fess Williams. Fess Williams was an incredible musician. His real name was Stanley Williams, but he was a teacher, so he got the nickname Fess for professor. And you can hear, in my opinion, you can hear the effect that had in terms of his stage presence in a lot of his work. So he was a clarinetist, he was a band leader, and he was an entertainer. And I mean capital E entertainer. He was known for wearing rhinestone-studded tuxedos and his top hat. And he led one of the most successful and well-loved black orchestras of the 1920s. He actually took time off from performing throughout the 30s and 40s. His last performance, fun fact, was with his nephew, Charles Mingus. Small world. Anyways, there's a possibility that he learned Gambler's Blues from King Oliver, who was documented to have performed it in a certain court case that we'll get into later. But there's lots of theories about how we actually got the information, but there's no way to really know, of course. Now this is the version of Gambler's Blues that Fess Williams put out. You can really hear his showmanship. And that's him and his band right there. So you might have noticed that at the end there's a lot of talk about these funeral rites. That was the main thing that all of the previous literature that incorrectly assumed that this song came from the Irish folk ballad, The Unfortunate Lad. They mainly just latched onto the fact that there were these discussion of funeral rites at the end of each song. But that was actually a common tradition of what was known as neck ballads or goodnight ballads, which were a type of broadsheet or lyric sheet that was often sold throughout the 16th to 18th or 19th centuries, where these were basically just songs written from the perspective, from the point of view of criminals that were facing execution and making their farewells. So that was a really common thing of the time. So it doesn't really garner enough proof to suggest that St. James Infirmary came from those things, or Gambler's Blues from that matter. But that was Fess Williams' version of Gambler's Blues, and you can hear it's a bit slower than some of the other versions you might hear, and you can definitely hear the timing of it, both from the quality of the recording on the record, and also from the way that he speaks. He still has that very showmanship quality about him, but he takes his time, right? And he's got a bit of that kind of relaxed way of speaking through as he's trying to essentially give the idea that he's having a regular conversation with the audience. That's something that we see a lot of time in performances. Satchmo's version, on the other hand, similar in the fact that it very much leans very heavily on the funeral aspect of the song in terms of the arrangement, which has these little horns, and it gives the feeling of a New Orleans funeral march. Now, this version that he recorded was arranged by Don Redman right here. It was the first known recording of St. James Infirmary under that title. It came out in 1928, just a year after Fess Williams' recording did. And the initial release actually credits Don Redman as the composer, not just the arranger, but he was a multi-instrumentalist. He was a master arranger and composer. He's now considered one of the most phenomenal and impactful jazz arrangers and composers of all time. So he had a massive impact on this recording. It was his arrangement and his direction that really shaped the way what we consider to be Louis Armstrong's version, which is really Louis and Don's version. And it's interesting too that Redman created the arrangement after hearing it performed in Detroit's own Greystone Ballroom on Woodward Avenue. And he was, at the time, part of the resident band there, which was known as the McKinney's Cotton Pickers. And this was one of the few spaces where black orchestras were able to play in what was considered a very high class establishment, worthy of respect and poise and grace. And he heard it there, and then he decided to arrange it, and they put it on Satchmo's album. So let's take a listen. This is with his Hot 5 jazz band, or his Savoy Hot 5. That's what it was. This is the part where it really gets into it.
I went down to St. James Infirmary. Saw my baby there. She was stretched out on a long white table. So cold, so sweet, so fast. Let her go, God bless her. Wherever she may be, she can look this wide world over, but she'll never find a sweet man like me. Bragging. When I die, bury me in straight lace shoes. I want a box-back coat and a Stetson hat. John Peter is. Put a $20 gold piece on my watch chain, so the boys will know that I died standing back.
That was Satchmo's version, and Louis Armstrong, of course, building with this arrangement and with the portrayal that he does of the narrator, relating back to the New Orleans jazz funeral culture, which he actually talked about some in his memoirs. He discusses, how he would always dress sharp to try to look his best. He talks about different funerals that he played in the marching bands for. He even talks about the Stetson hat specifically that he mentions there, and he talks about a time that he was marching at a funeral, and his jealous ex-girlfriend Daisy had found him, and he ran off and he lost his hat and she tore it to shreds. Man, he was mad. must have been extra mad to still remember it enough to write in his memoirs. But he talks about the importance that they felt for dressing as slick as they could to really show love to the dearly departed. And I think also you can hear both from the slightly jovial manner in which he engages and the intensity of the horn lines. You can hear the references he's making to that New Orleans type of playing, and especially when you think about the way culturally that we engage in those types of events, where it's not simply about the weight and the grief of the situation, but also finding a way to celebrate the life and to just keep the energy up in the community. And you could hear that both in the way that he discusses these jazz funerals and his time there, and in the performance here. It's also, I think this aspect of the cultural importance of St. James Infirmary and songs like it in the Black culture as well as Black history, especially when we think about the fact that St. James Infirmary was oftentimes played kind of in that style of a dirge of a funeral song. It makes it, in my opinion, that much more insidious to consider the deliberate erasure of its historical origins and the acts of really what one could even consider cultural violence. That not only did those scholars want to claim that this had come from Europe and claim that it was not at all originated from the Black folks that put so much love and so much heart and so much effort into the arrangements, the performances, the rewritings of lyrics for this tune, but also the publishing companies that snatched it up. And the key actor in this, the key agent, was known as Joe Primrose. Joe Primrose is who is credited on all subsequent releases of St. James Infirmary, including all of the releases of even that same recording that was arranged by Don Redman, which originally credited him as the composer. Now, Joe Primrose is actually a pseudonym. It was a pseudonym for a man named Irving Mills. He was a music promoter and publisher. He later went on to be a booking manager and even be, at some points, the director of the recording company that later became known as Columbia Records. But he got his career started by buying up, copyrighting, and redistributing Black compositions, especially the blues and later jazz. So you'll see his name on so many jazz records, especially a lot of Duke Ellington music, which is interesting to note because there is so much controversy in the community about how much input he really had on the writing and creation of those things. It became such a hot point that even then, as these recordings were coming out, that it led to a major court case, a trial that made it all the way up to the Supreme Court. It took place in 1930, and Mills essentially, through not just the pseudonym of Joe Primrose, but specifically through his publishing company and the offshoots of his music publishing company, he fought tooth and nail to keep the monopoly on the rights to all versions of the song under the title St. James Infirmary. Now, this, of course, to us seems ridiculous because we know St. James Infirmary existed long before he ever got the copyright on it. But not only that, the recording that was the first ever published recording of St. James Infirmary under that name actually came out 3 months before they had copyrighted it and submitted the contract. And this is something, of course, that they just dismissed and said, oh, it was just an error, just a clerical mistake, right? Even the prosecutors, though, the attorneys that were representing Mills and his companies even stated that they understood that Gambler's Blues and St. James Infirmary were essentially the same song, one that had been around for a long time. But the court essentially held up, the argument that was made was that it was the name that they were trademarking. They tried to use metaphors like, oh, well, you know, anybody can sell acetaminophen, but only one company can sell Tylenol, right? Which to me, this may be a hot take, but medicine, music, kind of two very different things in terms of the physicality of one thing that has to be produced a very specific way, and the fact that this is music that passed down through oral tradition and has been documented as such. And they actually, the defendants brought in multiple witnesses in this trial, proving that, and testifying that they had heard the song St. James Infirmary under that title performed by other folks long before Irving Mills ever got his hands on that copyright. But the judge dismissed those, saying that they needed proper documentation, which of course would have been very difficult to get back then. It's not like you could have just whipped out your tape recorder at a concert in the middle of the early 1900s. But anyways, nevertheless, the copyright stood, and Irving Mills, or Joe Primrose, got to maintain his stranglehold on the St. James Infirmary economy. Now, later on, we did get to see more recordings, thankfully, of St. James Infirmary and the next big push that really publicized and brought a lot more popularity to the song was Cab Calloway's version. But first, I have to mention that even though, of course, it was inaccurate to try to state in any way that Joe Primrose or Irving Mills had composed or invented or originated St. James Infirmary. And of course, it seems unfair and illogical that they would be allowed to maintain that copyright on a song that they didn't write. But it's worth noting that they weren't the first or from the only one to do it, because even on Fess Williams' track, it was credited to Moore and Baxter, who had published their version of Gambler's Blues, which is the name they had for it before, and of course they didn't write it either. It's also worth noting that they have Fess Williams listed as a comedian rather than performer, band leader, conductor, musician, anything of the likes, which to me really shows us a strong indicator of how, as much as the court seemed to value all of this felt importance that they had given it the new name and that somehow had brought more popularity to the song, there was no attention whatsoever paid to the musicians that had arguably the greatest role in shaping the tune and making it something that people considered worth buying, worth listening to. Now, Fess Williams was the first person to record Gambler's Blues. Satchmo was the first person to record it under the name St. James Infirmary. But it was really popularized to the American public when it was performed by Cab Calloway on, well, first of all, many different recordings. But the most famous of which was that which he did for Fleischer Studios with Betty Boop. So he was managed by Irving Mills, and that's of course how he likely came across the song, since it was under Irving Mills's copyright consortium, and he produced versions that were all really well loved by the community, but none so far-reaching as the one he did in the Betty Boop short where he played Coco the Clown. And it's interesting to note that the movements that you see from the cartoon character, both as the ghost and as Coco the Clown, those are actually Cab Calloway's dance movements. So they had just invented, they being Max Fleischer, the head of Fleischer Studios, who produced Betty Boop and all those cartoons, they had just invented this thing called the rotoscope, which was essentially a device and process of filming the dance movements and then tracing over them frame by frame. Now, obviously, when you see Coco the Clown turn into something crazy like a pocket watch or a hat, Cab Calloway didn't do that. But everything else was Cab Calloway's artistry, which I think is a really beautiful thing because we get to see how it was preserved in this way. Let's take a look. hate when that happens. So what a wonderful representation of Cab Calloway's performance. And it's really, I do have to take the time to give some credit to Fleischer Studios and Betty Boop, because part of the cultural importance of Betty Boop, especially the earlier versions before the Hays Code and all of that, those censorship laws were implemented, was that they did often showcase jazz music, and albeit it would be in what kind of became these surrealist scenes that might have, had more aspects of danger that they were personifying with the jazz music. It still was a platform that a lot of jazz musicians, including, of course, Cab Calloway, who was back on a couple other times, but also Louis Armstrong, also Ella Fitzgerald, and some other really, really important jazz folks got to share their music in this way, where it would have reached audiences that perhaps they may not have reached otherwise. It's also worth noting that aside from the problems that they ran into bumping up against the Hays Code, where they had to later give Betty Boop a longer dress and more domestic activities, and get rid of her boyfriend and all of that stuff, the controversy surrounding Betty Boop was not isolated to those more aesthetic matters that were pressed by the Hays Code, but Fleischer himself, Max Fleischer, the head of the studios that produced Betty Boop, actually received threats from the KKK for having Cab Calloway over to his house. So the inherent dichotomy and multifaceted nature of this history really shows that throughout the lifetime of St. James Infirmary or Gambler's Blues, it has always been, its history has always been steeped in this kind of very, very direct fight against and for racism, both in terms of the scholars that wanted to claim it as a offshoot of the Irish folk song, even though they were constantly condescending and talking down about what they called the Negro versions, and on the one hand dismissing differences as confusion because of the black folks that were creating it, while also claiming, oh no, this clearly came from Europe, came from the motherland, through all kinds of different peddlings of different misinformation, even making claims that, such as that, they were referring to St. James Hospital in London. Now, why would an Irish folk song talk about London? I don't know, but maybe, I'm sure A.L. Lloyd, who was the main person pushing those myths, would have come up with another line to put on top of it, just like he made up lyrics and openly admitted to doing it. And just like even Irving Mills or Joe Primrose's lawyers even openly admitted that Gambler's Blues and St. James Infirmary were essentially the same tune and had been around for at least decades before they had copyrighted it. You add that to the direct bigotry that was thrown upon the performers of this music, both through the aggression that was sent towards anybody that gave them a platform, including Betty Boop, but also just the fact that it is a jazz standard, a really beautiful composition that was often looked down upon. People considered it to be crass or crude. Even with what I consider to be very important and even sacred connection to the New Orleans jazz funeral culture. To me, this kind of inherent contradictory history, I shouldn't even say contradictory history, but conflict-filled history of the song imparts that much more importance on the discussion of it and its real history. It came from Black folks singing the blues. And every time they altered the lyrics, every time they sang it a different way and used a new arrangement under it, they were adding to its evolution, adding to the composition, adding to the long tradition of the tune and of the efforts that go into producing it and sharing it with folks. No. That being, and to that point, I would like to give us all an opportunity to also add to that tradition. So I brought some worksheets that just have some templates. You can use them if you want or not. But I thought it would be fun for us to add our own lyrics to St. James Infirmary, make our own alterations. After all, that's part in keeping with the tradition, right? So all you have to do is you can change the existing lyrics, or you can write a completely new verse, and you can make it funny or sad. Doesn't really matter, it's up to you. All it has to do is make sure the second and the fourth lines rhyme. So you can, hopefully Richard will bring us a couple more writing utensils, yeah. But the templates there, you'll see I've left some blanks if you want to fill in your own words, or you have some other space where you can create your own verse from scratch if you'd like. Anyways, in the meantime, I'll give some music to think to, but when you're done, I'm going to perform these lyrics for you, and that will be our own addition to the evolution of St. James Infirmary. So who, does anybody want to share their lyrics first? Or do you want to send them up here? You want to share? Wonderful. What's your name?
Patricia?
Nice to meet you, Patricia. Okay.
I have, I was called Pat as a child, and I remember that song because when I die standing Pat, I remember that a long time ago. I have to set the scene for this wonderful song that I have written. I grew up in Flint, Michigan. Anybody here from Flint? Yay! There were 2 funeral homes that I know about in Flint when I was growing up. This would have been like mid-50s. One of them was Leo Green, and he was like the more sophisticated kind of guy. And the other one was Spencer. I don't remember Mr. Spencer's first name. But I guess they were kind of in competition, but you don't really notice that when you're 7 years old. But the thing about Spencer's was that if you went on Friday and you looked at the bodies, and I don't know why they would let even, I mean, it was a big thing for school kids. You would get a free rain hat. There's no, I don't know. There used to be a rain hat. It was like folded plastic made like a fan, clear plastic, and it was a big deal. It was like the first time they were invented is when we saw them being given away at Spencer's. And as far as I know, every kid in the second grade but me had one, and it was really very traumatic. So, you don't expect me to sing, do you?
No.
Okay. All right, and I can't barely see what I'm doing.
If you want to pass those up,
Pardon?
if you want to pass those up, I'll sing them back.
I don't know that you can even read it. You can try.
Thank you.
I'll stand here to the truth.
So let's see, I went down to Spencer's funeral home, right?
Yeah.
I saw my old auntie there. She had on her finest church hat with spit curls in her hair. When I died, dressed me in 3 can petticoats with a fox stole and matching hat. Don't worry about my makeup, but give me my free rain hat. I love that. Let's go ahead and give it. I went down to Spencer's funeral home. I saw my sweet auntie there, my old auntie there. She had on her finest church hat with spit curls in her head. When I die, dress me in 3 can petticoats with a fox stole and matching hat. Don't you worry about my makeup, but give me my free rain hat. Something like that. Beautiful, beautiful.
It's not as good.
All right. Let's take a look at this one. I'm gonna try to think about how Cab will do this one. So folks, I went down to Carolina. I saw my mama there. She was stretched out on a long white table, so bright, so gold, so fair. When I died, so precious and not just for me. Wonderful, I love it. Beautiful. Yes. Thank you. This one. Better be able to read this handwriting by now. Let's see. Alrighty. I went down to the river. I saw my baby's reflection there. She was stretched out on a long white table, so cold, so bold, so fair. I like that. When I die, bury me in black. I want a button-down shirt and a top hat. Put a gold dollar collar upon me, so the hogs know I died fat. I want 6 big pallbearers and a bird to sing me a song. Won't you put a rose upon my hearse wagon to admire as I roll along? I went down to the river to wash my soul in hopes that my love will shine bold. I want all my people to know that I love them all amazingly so. Beautiful, beautiful. Alright, last but not least, thank you. Lovely handwriting. Alright. So I went down to Michigan and trumbled. I saw my sweet old friend there. Tigers there, it's my bad. I went down to Michigan and trumbled. Saw my sweet old tigers there. They were stretched out on a long white table. So lost, so unlucky, so fair. When I die, bury me in the outfield. Oh, it's my bad. What's this one? I want an umpire. I want an umpire. I want an umpire in an almost perfect game. Put a home team jersey upon me, so the fans will know I died in shame. I want 6 bum boys for pallbearers. I want an organist to play me a song. Put a hot dog on my hearse wagon to sit in mustard as I roll along. It's good, yeah. Until it happens, save me a seat in the bleachers. Put my
Scorecard.
Put my scorecard in a frame. Forgive me if I leave at the 7th inning stretch. They're behind, and I'm not to blame. Wonderful. Wonderful. Forgive me, it's been a minute since I've read such lovely cursive. Excellent. Alright, so those are all fantastic expansions of the tune. Really, really beautiful. Thank you so much for contributing to the long life, and hopefully which will continue to be a long history a favorite tune of mine, really. And part of what I love about this song is every time we add to it, every time we change to it, we are essentially both reaching back and reaching forward, right? We're adding to the life of the song, but we're also, in honoring the traditions of the song, we are showing respect and honor to those that sang it, enjoyed it, listened to it, shared it, wrote about it before us. And that continuation, to me, is a really important underlying part of what we're doing, you know? Because this is a song, especially this, and there are so many stories of erasure, right? But this is a song that has somehow survived it. And through all of these different points in history, folks tried to erase its origins and tried to essentially squeeze it into this tiny little box of what it could or couldn't be. And of course, we know that music, like any art, like any form of culture, like any form of human connection, it can't be constrained. It must be allowed to continue to grow and evolve and expand and be as living as us. Without further ado, I would like to share you my version of St. James Infirmary. I'll admit, partial to some of the older lyrics, but partial just because I feel like when I sing them, and when I say partial, I just mean partial more to them than I am to any that I might try to write. I love that when I read another person's lyrics to St. James Infirmary, whether it be the ones that Satchmo used, or the ones that Fess Williams used, or the ones that Cab Calloway used, or the ones that you all shared with me today. I love reading other folks' lyrics, I guess, because I can really portray that character, the narrator that you have created within this story. And each different version is a slightly different story, slightly different narrator, slightly different feel and tone. And that's what I love to embody. And that's what I think makes it so exciting. Here's St. James Infirmary. Do me a favor, just snap with me. Yeah. See, I went down to Joe's barroom on the corner of the square. See, they were serving drinks as usual, and the usual crowd was there. Now on my left stood old Joe McKennedy. His eyes were bloodshot red. Oh, he turned around and addressed the crowd, and these were the words he said. He said, I went down to St. James Infirmary. I saw my precious baby there. She was stretched out on a long white table, so cold, so sweet, so fair. Let her go, God bless her. Wherever she may be, she can look, she can hide inside never find a sweet man like me. Bragging. Now when I die, bury me in stringless shoes. I want a box back gold and a Stetson hat, John B. That is. Put a $20 gold piece on my watch chain, so the boys will know I'm flying and standing pat. I went down to St. James Infirmary. Guess what I saw? My baby was there. She was stretched out on a long white table, so good, so sweet, so fair. When I die, bury me in a box back coat and a Stetson hat. Won't you put a $20 gold piece on my watch chain, so the boys know I died standing pat. Shame, but it about damn. Now, folks, that's the end of my story. Won't you pause another round of bills? And if anyone at all should ask you, tell them I got the St. James Infirmary. I got the St. James Infirmary. The St. James Infirmary. Thank you so much, everybody, and thank you for not just for contributing to the song as a whole, but for contributing to it in this moment, contributing to the life of it and of our history together here at the Hannah Center, making music, talking about music together. Thank you for being here. I appreciate it.
Hey, Sophia, could I ask you one question? I'm
Of
so
course.
sorry I was late, but I was just, can you maybe in 2 sentences tell about the Irish part?
Sure. So essentially, the storyline is that around the turn of the century, people started looking back at this Irish folk song known as The Unfortunate Lad, and basically making these claims, unsubstantiated as they may have been, that it was the source of many other songs which they linked together in what they called the rake cycle. So basically the tune itself was came from around the 18th century, and all of these scholars that started making these suggestions, making these claims, were often putting out this literature where they would make the argument and then often give little to no evidence for the argument, or even just make the statement and not follow up with the argument at all. And then what happened is a lot of these sources would quote each other's misinformation about the rake cycle and about these different songs. And so there were all of these sources that stacked upon each other gave the illusion of academic canon, of real research, exactly. And then A.L. Lloyd, this folklorist, this folk singer and journalist, he put out an article in 1947 that was basically the first article claiming that St. James Infirmary came from The Unfortunate Lad, was part of the Rake cycle of songs. And in this article, he basically admitted in the article and in all of these other interviews, he admitted openly to changing the lyrics of many of the songs that he was documenting, whether it be to form a composite of multiple different versions, or just because he felt the existing version was inadequate. So he used this tactic when he wrote about St. James Infirmary, and he actually changed the lyrics of The Unfortunate Lad to make them more similar to St. James Infirmary to support his claims. And then he dispelled any other differences with just basically condescendingly saying that, oh, that was just confusion within what he called the Negro versions. And so then he was cited by numerous academic sources since then, and it became so widely accepted both in academic canon and in the vernacular oral history that even popular artists like Bob Dylan made the same false claims that were, of course, just based on decades of self-imitated misinformation.
Thank you. Are you saying race cycle or rake cycle?
Rake cycle, R-A-K-E.
Oh, neither one.
Yeah.
Okay.
So it was.
Quiet now.
they had called it The Unfortunate Rake, which was another aspect of misinformation, which is kind of funny.
So a lie told often enough.
Essentially. Basically, the story behind The Unfortunate Rake versus The Unfortunate Lad was that the rake, R-A-K-E, was this kind of character archetype, especially common during that period of the 18th century in England. And it was this kind of unsavory character that had all these vices and was kind of similar to like the trickster archetype, except he would always meet his very unfortunate end. And the unfortunate rake, he claimed to have seen this 18th century broadsheet or lyric sheet, but nobody ever has been able to produce it. And he basically, because of all of these repetitions of the idea that the unfortunate rake was the original version, the unfortunate rake and the unfortunate lad essentially became synonymous, especially in American culture. So then people would look back and say, oh, well, he was talking about the unfortunate rake and he put these lyrics here, therefore that must be the original that all of this came from. Of course, it was not. That's where the term rake cycle came from, was surrounding that idea. Any other questions?
I missed the beginning of your presentation also, and I'm sorry. But, so I was wondering, that choral riff that you were playing at the end, when you were singing your version, did you present that same recording earlier in your lecture?
Well, so the voices that I had underlaid under me, those are actual, I had recorded this previously. So I recorded the choral harmony kind of as an homage to Louis Armstrong's version, in which he initially, well, the opening of the tune of the recording actually has horns playing those lines, but later on there are vocals, or there are voices singing those lines underneath him, and then he is singing the lyrics over those. So that's what inspired me to recreate it in that way.
Because it makes it sound just like a work song, and I'm wondering if that's one of the origins, or maybe the origin of this, that you know, the underlying theme of it is very little variety in it. It's just, and it sounds like this the sort of thing that people at hard labor might sing if they broke out into song.
Certainly, there's definitely that connection there. So when we think about the history of blues, right, we can't separate it from the history of plantation song, and so that's where a lot of these musical traditions came from. And St. James Infirmary in particular, when you look back at some of the folks that documented that were claiming, oh, it came from here, it came from there, it came from wherever, and specifically looking in the States, there were numerous sources that were specifically quoting black folks that were singing it, and there in particular was a source that, and I can't recall her name all of a sudden, or her last name. I remember her first name, which was Deborah, which is of course not helpful. She actually went through this process of documenting songs that were heard, sung by black folks working on plantations, especially documenting songs that she recalled hearing in her youth, living at home where her family owned many, or I should say, human trafficked many black folks. And so she was actually documenting a lot of the songs directly from those sources. So if anything, it is only logical to assume that it did arrive from, in terms of the real source and the context at which it sprung up. It likely did come up as a work song, as something sung upon plantations. And it's especially easy to make that connection when you think about the time period here, right? So it was versions of Gambler's Blues, aka St. James Infirmary, were written about as early as 1908. So really, really right at the turn of the century. And it's hard to imagine that was the first iteration of the song. Just because it was the first time it was documented.
It had to exist before that.
Exactly.
I'm not a musician at all, and you used the same term plantation music last time, but we're talking about African rhythms, right?
Well, so we're talking about African rhythms, but we're specifically talking about the music that was sung on plantations by black folks there.
But
And
that's
so
where
those,
the black folks came from. I mean, they must have had this song in their heart on the bowels of ships.
I mean, certainly we brought over our cultural traditions, our songs, and even our instruments in terms of like things like the banjo, which is an instrument that we brought over, and certain other things. But specifically, there was this cultural context that was really thoroughly documented and later renamed barbershop harmony. And so specific harmonies that were sung among the black folks working, often when they were singing the Negro, what are now called Negro spirituals, and then folks would write down just the one melody line of the Negro spiritual because they assumed that the other parts were being improvised, or which were just extraneous, essentially, because they couldn't understand the way that the harmonies were working. So you can really trace back those harmonic tendencies, as well as those melodic tendencies, back to prior to the transatlantic slave trade, and especially if you're looking at West African music in particular. You can see a lot of those similarities there. But when we talk about plantation harmony, we're really talking about specifically what was sung in those specific points, in those specific cultural contexts, where it was folks that were coming together, often not having any language between them if it was early enough, where certainly not only were certain cultural traditions perhaps conflicting in nature, but often obviously suppressed, where we were not allowed to often sing those songs or in the languages that they had been previously written and passed down. So this was really an amalgamation of all of that history and culture, and those memories that were passed down through oral tradition that evolved to become plantation harmony. Yeah, of course. Any other questions? All right. Thanks for hanging out.